Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, It's an Honor to Be Here, curated by Maria Burke and Madeline Beaumier. Today, we are thrilled to present artist Carmen Ostermann. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth, so if one of us freezes up, the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Carmen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I wanted to say thank you to the Ohio Arts Council and to the Rife Gallery for hosting such an amazing exhibition, especially to Kat and Maria and Madeline as well for curating the show. It's been an honor, so I'll just jump right into it. My name is Carmen, and the first thing I'll touch on is kind of background. I grew up in lots of different settings, some natural, some very man-made. We were overseas growing up, so I was in some like big cities, and then my family's originally from Canada, Alberta area, so plains and prairies, and then up to the mountains. So being exposed to these very man-made locations and natural settings really impacted my practice as an artist. And this is kind of just brings me to where I went with my undergraduate work. So I am going to show a few pieces from undergrad. I went to the University of Cincinnati at the Design, Art, and Architecture and Planning University there. And while I was there, I was doing more sculptural work. I wasn't in the ceramic work yet. And I was thinking a lot about this relationship of the man-made versus the natural. This is a piece where I was working a lot with wood and natural elements like this cookie from a tree, this slice, as well as metals. I took liquid aluminum and then I would pour it on this piece and it would, go through the pores and all the surfaces of this piece of wood. And then you could see this like an incredible reaction and this integration that was happening, and also kind of this taking over, thinking of the man-made versus the natural. And I was still incorporating kind of architectural elements in there too, thinking about the topography of the planet and how we have impacted that so directly. So I'm definitely have this idea of nature and the man-made in my mind. I like to show this piece too. This shows you the surface difference. So this is like an old wooden floorboard that I poured the aluminum on. And you can see the patina on the aluminum and this like incredible reaction that's happening. And this relationship that exists that is both destructive and beautiful. So at this point, I'm thinking about this destruction that's occurring and then the beautiful elements that happen with destruction. So yeah, so those are some earlier works. And it was also soon after this that I started thinking a lot about birds, which you will see mostly of in my work. And this was like the first ceramic bird piece I made. And another theme you'll see is I am blending fiber and clay and trying to do that more and more so in my practice. So that's a little bit about that earlier work when I was in Cincinnati. I want to touch on some like early influences at that time. Like a lot of people in this exhibition, I'm very impacted by scientists and people in the scientific community. So here I have Roxy Laybourne and her team that were showing the collection they have here at the Smithsonian of the ornithology collection, and just thinking about how we try to understand nature in this scientific collective way that's destructive, thinking about and morbid and thinking about this idea of researching and understanding things, which is beautiful, but then how it really takes it away from the nature. So I was fascinated by this, and I'm thinking a lot about museum and collection and all of those sorts of things, alongside with reading the book Braiding Sweetgrass. And if you haven't yet, I highly recommend. Robin Wall Kimmerer is an amazing writer, and she really touches on this relationship too, because she's an Indigenous person from the Potawatomi Nation, but she's also a scientist, and she talks about this kind of more spiritual and traditional relationship with nature as alongside her being a scientist and what this relationship is like. So I was just really thinking about the tension between these two things and how interesting that was. And also being really impacted by some incredible female scientific illustrators who were representing and showing nature as it is. Genevieve Jones on the left has this incredible book, actually in Ohio from Ohio Nests, and she and her family made these unbelievable illustrations showing nests and nature before photographs and things like that. And it's just like such a tribute to nature, and it's so amazing to see that work that she did, and thinking a lot about labor at this point. If you get a chance to look at that collection, it's incredible. And then in regards to more the relationship with illustration and science, Maria Marion on the right, she was one of the first illustrators to start showing nature as it is, not just making beautiful illustrations of botanicals and birds, but actually showing like, oh, this insect eats this plant. So I'm intentionally going to put this insect here and actually show a little bit of decay or those sorts of things. So connecting education with art is really important to me, and just thinking about those concepts was huge. So I'm going to kind of transition into some graduate work here. I went to the Columbus College of Art and Design for my MFA. And while I was there, that's when I started really having this focus on ornithology and birds. And I definitely approach my practice with like a scientific lens. So in order to understand something, I really like to spend time with it and research it and try to study it. So I would select a specific species, and I normally start off by making multiple illustrations. And just looking into if I can see them in person, I'll see them, and if I can um, look at them online or look at images, I will, and just making lots of iterations to try to understand the form and also how they exist in nature, and then moving on to ceramic. So I was at this point thinking about the collection. So I was making all of these like taxidermy, species, and kind of thinking about collection and that sort of thing. And this was kind of my first go and approach at kind of thinking about these ideas. In tandem with that, I was also thinking a lot about ecological succession. And that is the process by which the species composition of an ecological community changes over time. So thinking about if there's some form of destruction, whether that's natural, like a forest fire, or an unnatural, like a man-made fire, and then what occurs and comes about after that destruction. And I was showing that by thinking about the micro, thinking about the small organisms and things that come about afterwards. And once again, there's this conversation between destruction and life afterwards, which you could describe as beauty. So eventually these two ideas blended, and I had my ceramic birds, and I started putting these, nodes or these pieces onto the birds themselves to show this relationship and think about consumption, because ultimately I was trying to think about how to represent humans' relationship with nature, right? And how to show that beauty, but also the 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 scary things that are happening right now and the tricky things that we're working through and trying to navigate as we really impact the surface of the earth and the planet. I also like to show some of my illustrations. I make a lot of work on vellum, and I'll do multiple illustrations of one species and then layer them. So this is a work, just the scanned images, but here's installation of the pieces. And a lot of times I will display the illustrations alongside the ceramic work. So the same species, you'll see the illustrations and you can associate that with the ceramic work at the show. So definitely a comprehensive trying to understand. And and here I have some embroidery work. So once again, thinking about fiber, I feel like for anyone out there who's a ceramic artist, it's something that, like the hard and the soft, it's so tempting to be working with both, and that's something I'm really thinking about right now. So I started making stitches and embroidery of a lot of these microorganisms, and here's an image of it installed, right? So working through and thinking about those things and displaying all of these elements of ecological succession in different ways. And this is just an image to show kind of how, in the beginning it was just a touch of that. And like you could just see like, oh, what's happening here? But by the end, some of these pieces were just getting like completely consumed. So you're trying to figure out as you look at it, like what's going on here. And eventually it gets almost, I think, a little bit like suffocating. And that moved into this eventually where it was like just becoming parts of the bird. So you could see like a wing or you could see the head. And then the rest was just being completely consumed, and it's becoming their own forms at this point. And it's for me it's like, oh well, this is beautiful, it has lots of relation to like fungi and coral, but then you see the bird and you're like, oh, what's happening here? So trying to have that conversation. In regards to more contemporary influences, I have a few shout outs here that are huge, like Mark Dion, thinking conceptually, like this is an image of a tree ring piece where he's labeling and showing what happened each year in the ring of the tree. And it's almost like at this point humorous because, it starts off with the construction of the Great Wall and all of these like incredible things that happened, the dodo being extinct and everything. But then at the very end, the last one is the redwood tree harvested to make a picnic table. So kind of this conversation of like all of these incredible historical moments and then the destruction that happens at the end there. In regards to materials, Kate McGuire uses feathers to make her sculptures, and material and craft is like essential in my work. So she's a great example of that. And then, of course, with the feathers and this conversation is huge. So if you get a chance to look at her work, I highly recommend. And then Marjolein Dallinga is on the end here. She's a felting artist, and process is another really essential part of my work. So thinking about this is a image of her throwing and building and working with her felt. And fiber, which I'm really interested in. So you'll see, I'm going to show you all images of my process and how I make the pieces. And you'll kind of see how that is a long process and the relationship there. I also like to make a shout out to some like more directly educational artists. So like Courtney Madison here on the left is a ceramic artist as well. And she makes these incredible coral installations where she's really talking about the bleaching of coral reefs and what's happening there. So she has the color and the coral there, and then it comes out and it becomes white. And that's another thing I was really interested in. I think I like to show with my work, my porcelain pieces are fired and they're just not glazed, they're completely white. And I think a lot about that coral bleaching and the life being pulled out of it and showing it in that way. And then on the other side here is Alexis Rockman, who makes these astounding, massive mural paintings and all these different things. But he's selecting species that are related to the conversation he's having. So this is all about the Great Lakes and the history of the Great Lakes and the pollution that's happening there, humans' relationship with it, as well as animals and like the history of what's occurred. And what's really incredible with their work as well is that there's labels at the exhibition, so you can see and refer to specific species and see like, oh, what is that? And then he'll show you from a map that's with the work. And it's just amazing. So something I like to bring up is this is a summary of kind of where I was at making this work. We are currently experiencing the Anthropocene extinction, the ongoing sixth great mass extinction in which a large number of living species are threatened or eliminated entirely due to environmentally destructive human activities, right? It's our presence that is causing that. And considering that this is the first biotic crisis caused by an animal and not by a natural event, and that I am one of those animals, has strongly steered me towards my current practice. Thinking about being human, right, in this world. Birds have been hit hard as their population is lowered by 3 billion since the 1970s, and that is approximately like 1/3 of all birds. So they simply cannot survive the swift alterations humans are inflicting on the environment. So that is really kind of what pushed me and has been pushing me to make this work and think about this conversation. Um, And I'm going to touch a bit on materials, what I use and how I use it. So the earlier work you saw before, that was a lot of stoneware, and then I shifted and started working in porcelain. So this is just images of porcelain work. I also do lots of studies. I like to take a material and play with it and work with it in lots of different ways. So there's some like felted and fiber nests here, as long as the porcelain nest thrown, some glass pieces. That's just like a shot from my studio. So exploration is huge for me. And then here I'm once again trying to think about like fiber and clay. So there's these little porcelain studies, these like micro studies alongside the embroidery and the felting. I want to show this piece. This is a sleeping swan, and I was really trying to figure out how to create a tie between fiber and clay, and that's something that I'm constantly working on. I'm still really interested in right now. So you can see the holes I've put in the side of the bird here, and then after I fired it, I took a thread and I bound it so that it was bound around the top of this large wooden board that it's displayed on. And each of those like individual threads kind of slow down and taper out. So it appears as if it's bound, even though it's epoxied onto the wooden board. So that just kind of shows, once again, thinking about materials, fiber, clay, this conversation I'm really interested in. Sketching and illustration is like normally the first step in the work. And just in my studio, there's just lots of ideas everywhere. Rough ideas, thinking about form and specific species, what I'm learning about them. So I just like to show kind of this rough start that occurs, and then later on shifts into the more, the craft of the preciseness with the illustrations and with the porcelain. So here are some of, once again, the illustrations, those ink illustrations in the studio. And now I'll kind of touch on process and how I make the porcelain pieces. I thought it would be appropriate to um, show one of the pieces that's actually in the show. And it's the whooping crane. So to start this form, I work solid. So I have the solid form I make, and it's kind of what I call just like a pillar. And then I let that sit and let it set up. And while that's happening, I make the bird solid as well. So I'll make different parts like the wing, the head, the neck, and then I hollow them out as I go. You'll see here. So kind of this is the rough start. And then I have to go in and work on detail before assembling it. So here you can see I have hollowed it out and I'm starting to carve all the different things, carving in the feathers and the eye, the beak, and then I have a talon on the edge here too. So kind of working in all these parts and pieces. And then I begin assembling them. So by the time I'm assembling this bird onto this pillar, I've already hollowed it out. So I've hollowed out the pillar and I'm putting the bird together here, and I'm putting the wings on. And by this point, when I was making this piece that's in the show, I knew that I just wanted the parts and pieces because I really wanted the ecological succession and the nodes to be a really large, to be the dominant part of it. And you can see here each of those nodes I've been saying, which are inspired by like fungi, coral, plants in foliage in this bird's, natural environment. They're all handmade and they're all assembled and slip and scored on individually. So it's a very time consuming process. And with that, it's essential to have like the paper towels on that beak or on the wings because things are drying out. So this is like a tricky time at this point. It's like trying to put everything on, but not have it dry out. It's a big, big battle, but it's like this amazing relationship with clay and time that I really like as well. And you can kind of see there's some surfaces that are smooth, but then they slowly get completely consumed by all of these nodes. Um, and here, this is when it starts drying. So not only is it essential when you're working on the building part that you're working on this, but also drying it. It's hollow on the inside, so I'll put two boards on the bottom and let air get up throughout it, but you really want to make sure it's drying at an equal rate. So there's just a long process of like the bags and paper towels and trying to make sure it's all drying together so it doesn't crack. It's definitely clay is like a humbling thing to work with. And then you do the horrifying thing of putting it in the kiln and hoping that it's dried properly and that it will then fire equally in the kiln. Something you'll see with my process photos in this slideshow is that there's like this powder on the kiln shelf on the bottom. And I always have to put sand or something like that on the bottom of the kiln shelf because porcelain shrinks so much. It can shrink up to 20% when it's being fired. So already there's this really, intricate thing, and then it gets even smaller. So it looks even tighter, which is like amazing because it creates this, like I said, this intricacy. But then also it's like, oh, it's so much smaller than when I first made it. So it's a pro and con sort of thing. And here are images of the final work, and you can see this in the exhibition, the front and the back. So the front here, you can obviously see like the whooping crane, their neck and the wing. And then on the back here, you can see those wings. There's like a talon coming out of the side, out of a hole. There's these caverns and it's coming out of the hole. I find that those holes and caverns, kind of like you would see in natural elements, I think it just creates this feeling of like decay, which I think kind of goes back, like growth and decay, which goes back to the concept I'm trying to reveal. And here's an image of it installed at the Beeler Gallery. This is where we had our MFA exhibition. So the whooping crane is in the center here, but then there's all of these other species, all of which are endangered species in all of the other glass cloches on the pedestal. So we have like the spoon-billed sandpiper, the piping plover, and a lot of others, Gunnison sage grouse, lots of other species here. So I am going to just touch a little bit on like the themes of my work before I go into some shows and some things that have gotten me to where I am today. So kind of just an overview of what I've been talking about. The first thing that really got me going and got me motivated to work on this practice is destruction, right? So thinking about the destruction that's occurring in our environment, mostly because of humans and their presence and what we do, but also natural destruction that happens there. And that moves into the ecological succession, which is talking a lot about change, right? And thinking about change as a positive or a negative thing, and what comes about after destruction. So trying to think about this relationship and what it should be and what it is, and all those sorts of things. Something I haven't touched on a ton, but you've seen in the images is collection and containment. So, collecting things to understand them and have this relationship, and containing them in doing that, right? So we do that in museums a lot in scientific exploration, and that these glass cloches and the containers I use to display the work really show that relationship and have that discussion. And that moves into scientific and traditional knowledge. So thinking about how we can have this understanding and do this research, but also how can we have more of a traditional approach or a relationship with nature rather than just kind of extracting it and collecting and containing it and trying to understand it. How can we understand it by being in it, or by giving back and these sorts of things? Connectivity. So kind of getting to that right now. So connectivity, how do we have this connection, make this connection? Whether it's like a personal connection with nature. I think I try to show this in my work because every single node and piece is holding in place the other ones around it, right? Like everything is connected the same way you would see in ecological relationships in nature. It is just same for us, right? Things are essential for us to function all together in a healthy way, thinking about ecosystem. So connectivity is essential. Habitat is a huge part of my work as habitat is such a, the big representation of what's occurred in nature, right? So habitat destruction is the leading cause of so much of species decline or extinction. So I find it really important and an important conversation when I show the work. This piece is a great example of that in this image. These are all little porcelain nests which have been installed in this show as well. It's an honor to be here. And in this one, they're just in a single line. I really love how the curators installed it in this show. It's kind of like a more organic form that's very like reminiscent of like tree ring or tide or the things like that. They've done a lovely job. But what you'll notice is that all of these little porcelain nests that are like hummingbird size, they're all vacant. There's no eggs in them, right? So thinking about home and our relationship with home and our habitat, and when there's not the opportunity to grow, and those sorts of things. And that is displayed with this piece. You'll notice that was like kind of on the left. And this is just like a tiny hummingbird with one of those nests. But attention. So that's the next one here. And I think with something like so small, it's funny how something really huge, but also something really tiny requires your attention. And I think I'm trying to show that, like, provide work that is hopefully intriguing enough that you're trying to figure out what's going on here and really zoom in and focus on it. I think you also end up paying attention to it because you notice your scale, right? You feel like, oh my gosh, this is this tiny little piece and it's intricate and small and just like a hummingbird is, and thinking about that. And I'm so much bigger than it. And there's also this tediousness of the piece appears as if it's going to fall off. It's connected to this like metal pole, but there's this a little bit of a tension there that calls for your attention. And I think attention as well is kind of the goal for, for the conversations we can have to make choices that are hopefully good ones moving forward for humanity and for the natural world. And the last one I have here that's really connected to the work I'm making now is reciprocity. So thinking about, once again, like actually having a relationship with nature that's more in depth than just like the research and the collection. And how do we give back? 'Cause we are given so much from the natural world, and it's how we exist. We are part of it, even though a lot of times I feel like we get so disconnected. So how can we be a part of that and have this reciprocal relationship? So those are some themes. Next, I'm going to talk about a few experiences that have happened that have led me to where I am today. So there is an artist in residence program at the Grange Insurance Audubon Center. If you haven't been yet, it's a beautiful center, right next to like German Village, Marion Village, and an incredible park to have right downtown. Columbus is truly amazing in that way, the resources that we have. But they have, it was perfect because it's an Audubon Center, so bird focused. And this is a photograph of me in the studio there. I was able to make work every day and also be there when people are coming through this public park, right? So just like libraries, public parks and libraries, they're just amazing spaces that there's no requirement. They're free, right? And they are places where anyone can go and they can either experience like education right through the library, but in this case, nature and that conversation. And it was really amazing to be making in a public space. I hadn't really done that before. And then also building a relationship with the administrative staff and the scientists and everyone who work at the Audubon there. Um, Something I like to do a shout out for is that while I was there, I learned about the Ohio Wildlife Center Hospital, another an amazing resource in Columbus, where they will take in animals. Right here it says how many patients they had admitted in 2021, 8,034, and animals that are injured or need some kind of help, and then they'll rehabilitate them and reincorporate them in the wild, if possible. So while I was there, I would bike to the residency every day. And one day I saw this cardinal on the street and it was just laying there and acting very strange. And I walked over and it wasn't flying away. So I was like, I'm just going to go back home and box this up. So I boxed it up and brought it there. And it was incredible because they rehabilitated it. They called me. They're like, we're releasing this bird at this location. Do you want to come? And I got to go and see this bird be re-released. So just an amazing resource and a wonderful reciprocal moment and experience. There were also multiple organizations that came through at the GCAC. So these were just some of the groups that came through and I was able to work with, which was wonderful. And then Also families coming through. I had a like open experience for people to make nests of their own. So those porcelain nests that you saw, the way that you make those, if you is you, it's very simple actually. You make a porcelain pinch pot, and then you press foliage into it throughout, and then you dip that into slip. And when you do that, it gets coated in the slip, in this porcelain slip. And when you fire it, those natural elements on the inside, they burn out. So I was able to do this with anybody and everybody. And what was really cool is that we collected foliage from the park and the area there. And then once we fired these pieces, it became kind of this portrait of the habitat itself that we were in, right? It became this portrait of the park and the plants and animals and everything there. So I really enjoyed that. And we ended up, here's some more images of people just like assembling and working on this. And then we ended up installing this piece at the park as well, which was great. So it was wonderful to make a piece with the community there. So here's an image of that. Um, and then after this residency later on, this was a really exciting for me. I like to touch on this first solo exhibition I had and how it was just such an amazing experience. It was at the Cultural Arts Center downtown. And I called it I Am One of Those Animals from that text that I had written earlier that I shared with you all. And I really like to make a big shout out to my team that helped me with this exhibition. It was extremely humbling to have a space that large and to be installing my work. It's just a tremendous amount of work. So once again, kudos to Kat, Maria, and Madeline for the show and the whole team at Rife because it's so much work to install a show and it's so amazing to bring it all together and show your work. And of course, a solo show was just such an incredible experience. So these are just the people who helped me make this show a reality. And I'm just so grateful to them. And it was a lot of fun. So it's really nice to reminisce and think about. So here's an image from the exhibition. And there, at this point, there's the pillar kind of consumption work I was talking about. You can see the swan at the end here. And I'm starting to make like the swan, some of these pieces that are coming off the wall more. On the right there, there's a series of swallows that are coming off the wall. And I take a piece and I'll epoxy it to a board and then it comes off the wall in that way. And I'm also making some more installation pieces with bird cages. So you can see that on the right as well. So once again, finding objects that are objects for containment and that conversation. Um, Here's another image. This side has, from the same exhibition, this side has more of the stoneware work. And I really enjoyed working with stoneware, but I just couldn't get the same detail and intricacy as I can with the porcelain because the porcelain I fire and I only high fire it once and then I don't need to glaze or paint it. Whereas with the stoneware, the surface was not how I wanted it to look. So I would end up painting it or glazing it in some way. So what I really enjoy about that porcelain is when you high fire it once, and it's just a recipe that I made, you get this surface that's kind of like a matte, but also shiny. It's just kind of lively in its own way. Yeah, I really enjoy working with it. Here's an image of that nest installation in the background and closer up of the bird cage piece. And once again, bringing in, always trying to figure out how to bring in like elements from nature for installation work and then the porcelain. So man-made, nature, all of these things in conversation. And here's an image of those swallows installed on the wall. I also made these like during and after my residency and I saw lots of these swallows when I was biking from my home to the park. And yeah, it's just great to think about moments when you're in nature and that relationship that you can have. Okay. And then I also wanted to touch on having opportunities to show in spaces that are not just like art practice, but also scientific and education based, which I get really excited about because my practice is so connected to art, education, and science. So there's in New York, there's the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. It's an amazing museum, and they reached out to me, and I was able to have a show there with four other female artists who all make work related to birds. So that was just such a lovely, lovely experience to have a show that was so focused, and and just to be showing with amazing other artists who are having similar conversations. So this exhibition was called Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and it was wonderful. They came and picked up my work, and we were able to go to the opening. And it's a beautiful space because this museum was built to collect and have all of Roger Tory Peterson's work, and have that history. He was one of the most influential people in regards to making illustrations of birds for birders who could like look in those traditional books you think of, and you look at the illustration and you can figure out which species it is. So really incredible history there. And it's just also a beautiful building. So these are some images of the work that was displayed in like their display cases, on a pedestal here, in their hallways. And it's just, yeah, it's a stunning building. So it was really awesome to have work in this museum space and alongside these other artists and have conversations with them in the community about birds and that relationship. And a lot of people who come here are birders. So it's great too to work specifically with birders in the birding community, people who appreciate that and are trying to make positive change. Later on, more recently in 2024, I had this show, Ecosystems in Elegy. And this is more recent work, which I'll show you. This was at Tiffin University. And it was a great way to display this hummingbird work I've been working on. So you can't see it super well, but behind the whooping crane here, there are five large circular pieces, which I'll show you some closer up images of a wall work I'm doing. So I'm doing more wall work, displaying the pieces on the wall rather than on a pedestal. And here are some images of other pieces in that show at Tiffin. It's been fun to display the nest piece in multiple different ways. So here you can see I have a very like circle. This is just a circle representation, whereas the work at the Rife Gallery is much more organic, but kind of along the same vein rather than just a straight line. And here is another image of that installation. So that was just a lovely show and a great experience. And that kind of touches on current work, that more recent work that I'm displaying and what I'm working on right now. So here are some images of a hummingbird piece that I had in that show. It's the Rufus hummingbird. And I start off, like I said, by making a kind of just a sketch, an idea of what that piece is going to be. And then I move in and I make it in, porcelain and clay. And something that was different with this work is I'm interested in getting and currently in moving towards a more educational space, if possible, with my work. I am really grateful for the conceptual path that has brought me here, thinking about destruction and humanity's relationship with nature. And now I'm starting to think about the reciprocity more so. So how can we give back, or what do people do after they see this work and they're thinking about these things? So I did research about this hummingbird, and I started looking into what are the native plants and native species that this bird needs to live, and what they have a symbiotic relationship with. And I found several species, and then I started making illustrations inspired by those species, that were the background of this piece. So, and I display and have those species written out with the work. So you can learn about the specific hummingbird species, but then you can also learn about the plants that attract and draw in this hummingbird. And I think that's a great conversation, because then people can start thinking about like, oh, if I want to do this in my own backyard, like what can I plant and what can I do? And that's really what I'm focusing on right now in my work. So these illustrations are actually color pencil. So color pencil, and then black ink for the background, and then the porcelain on top. And this is an image of that piece installed. So you have the two hummingbirds and then those illustrations in the back, and then the list of species at the show. Another body of work that I'm working on right now are my migration love letters. So these ink illustrations, I've like done this illustration of this bird here, are made on envelopes that once contained love letters between my parents that were written in the 80s, before there was any other opportunity or form of communication. So each envelope has a delivery and return address revealing the pathway that the letter once took. So on the envelopes are illustrations of specific species that used the same pathway as a migration pattern. So for example, this one started in Calgary, Alberta, and then it went to Quebec. And I would look at what species are migrating between those two locations. And yeah, so basically the age quality of the envelopes and hidden messages show a relationship containing vulnerability, wear, tear, love, time, and travel. I was really amazing to look at and notice like little notes that were written on these and all the little um, things that like marks or stamp and everything that the humans did, right, that my parents did. But thinking as well about the bird path. So simultaneously, the bird illustrations of selected species that use the exact pathway the love letters have taken reveal a bridge, right, between this human connections and the avian world. So each bird species was specifically selected under the following criteria. One, the bird migrates between the return and delivery address on each individual envelope. And two, the bird is categorized as vulnerable according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Red List of threatened species. And I have that information here. So at the show, I also have a QR code and a way for you to go and access the Bird Migration Explorer, which is an unbelievable resource. It's so, so cool. It's a website where you can go and you can literally see these migration patterns. So previously, a lot of my work, I would go to the library and I would do research and I would collect and learn things from the library, which I still love. But this is something you can just do on your phone, which is incredible. You can go to this website and you can see which birds are moving from where to where, and they'll show you that movement, and you can look at specific months and all this information. It's just an incredible resource. And the long-tailed duck, which is the bird in the first illustration, this is a screenshot from that website, and it shows those relationships. And I just think it's fascinating thinking about birds' pathways and human pathways and this conversation. So I'm working on a body of work right now with all of these envelopes that I'm going to have displayed at a show at High Road Gallery in 2025. So I'm really excited about that. So here are just some more of those illustrations. These are kind of in progress. But we'll see how they continue transforming until that show. But once again, it's just like the envelope unfolded carefully, and then the all the stamps and the wear and tear. And I also would notice like little notes that they left, and just this really, for me, really interesting conversation between the two. The two, yeah. There's like a little sweetheart written on the top of the envelope there. And lastly, here I want to speak about my the piece a piece that I actually just fired and talk about my current porcelain practice. So talking about process a bit here, the way that this begins a lot of the time is that I'll select a species and I try to be intentional about it. So these are sandhill cranes. And I begin by thinking about, for this body of work, I want to select species that are native to Ohio. So these birds are native to Ohio. And I also wanted to select a species that is vulnerable or endangered and have that conversation as well. So here are some more images of the sandhill cranes. Once again, the beginning is just finding the species that is making sense in my mind, and then thinking about why I'm selecting those species for which show or what's coming up, and then researching them. So looking at images, seeing if I can see them in nature and in the wild. This body of work I'm working on is about Ohio native birds as well as plants. So that's why this specific species was selected. And it's really important for me to be able to access images or the bird so that I can see it close up. So it's not just like shots of the body, but like what does the bill look like? How is this bird existing? where do they live? What kind of things do they eat? Just all of these things. I feel like for me, it's important. It's humbling to think about them in their environment and how they exist. And that's what it's all about, right? So with this work, I have images of native species that the sandhill crane live in tandem with, or they have this relationship with. So here are some species from Ohio, the oyster mushroom, American water plantain, swamp white oak, and lion's mane. And there's several others. With my pieces, I've been doing anywhere from 5 to 10 native plants, native foliage that the bird relates to or has a relationship with, symbiotic relationship. Um, and then lots of drawing and sketching, thinking out how they work, notes on the species, and yeah, just like lots of studying, kind of just lots of trying to understand. Here are some images of the bird, the piece I'm talking about right now in the beginning stage. So you can kind of get a better, closer look at those pillar forms. So I make the hollow cylinders and then I stack them. And then I'm making the separate birds pieces here. Another reason I selected this species is because I was interested in looking at birds that have, birds that mate for life or that will have a partner they pair with for life kind of thing. And that sandhill crane is one of those animals. So here I'm starting to assemble it. It's like a lot more rough at this point. And putting all of the pieces together here. And this is the first time I'm making a pillar, like kind of one of these more standing sculptural pieces that has two birds as well. So I'm excited about thinking about this very, for humans, thinking about our specific relationships with individual people or people if they choose to have long-term relationships and how these birds do that as well, right? And how that's a beautiful thing. And so I'm playing with having two birds in one piece. And then here are just some images of, you can see the pillars hollow, and then I'll slip and score. There's going to be a wing placed on this part right here where I'm about to place it. And you can also see the paper towels wrapped around the bills, just trying to have everything working at the same rate here. And here are some images after I've incorporated the wings and a tail. And then after I kind of get to this point, I'm here where I have like the bird parts are on there, the pillar is formed. A lot of times I cut it in half again at that point, which is hard to do, but it's good because then I take the time. This is after I've already cut it in half. It looks very chunky when I first do that, and then I go in and I just clean it out because in order for the work to fire properly, you really want it to be at a similar thickness throughout the whole piece. So this is just an image of it being sliced in half and then cleaning that out and making sure there's no air bubbles on the inside. With how time consuming this work is, like this piece was around 100 hours, it's worth it to take the time to give that extra love and care and make sure that everything's going to fire properly. And then, reassembling it back together, the one piece is laying on the sponges here and the other piece is still standing on this pedestal, and then slip and scoring it back together. So you can kind of see that seam, that line where it's been stitched on the image on the other side on the right. Here are some more images. Once again, like all of these specific nodes they are specific native species and plants. So previously, I wasn't getting that specific. So I'm really excited to be like, oh, this is this plant or this species, and this is where the sandhill cranes have that relationship with them. Lots of fungi too, so things like that. And actually, this was the first time that I incorporated insects, which I'm also excited about. So you can kind of see there's a June bug kind of beetle down on the bottom here on the image on the left. It's crawling up into the hole, and there's also a grub on the bill here. So yeah, so it's been really fun to get more specific and think about those relationships because the ultimate goal will be to fire and display this work so that people can incorporate that in their own backyard. There's an amazing program at the Grange Insurance Audubon Center where I had my residency that is called the Native Plant Backyard Challenge, and it's specifically for that. So people can join this group and they can learn about native plants that they can plant in Ohio that will attract native birds and native animals. And it's just how that is just such a positive thing and win-win for everyone, right? For all the native plants and animals, but also for the humans living there and, their natural environment that they're surrounded by. So I'm happy to say that this piece fired well, and I've safely taken it out of the kiln. You can see the sand again on the bottom there because of the shrinkage, but it's in one piece and I'm really excited to have it finished. And that just happened very recently. So sorry to not have a final image of that. So just to tie up here, some upcoming exhibitions I have. There'll be a group exhibition at Roy G. Biv in July. If you're interested in seeing those love letters as I continue kind of working through them, that will be at an exhibition at High Road Gallery in August. And then long-term homegrown, The Art of Living Together will be a show at the Dublin Arts Council in 2026. And that is the show that is really focused on native plants and native birds in Ohio, and those relationships. So yeah, so thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate anyone taking the time to jump in. And here's my website and Instagram if you're interested in seeing it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carmen. You can keep it on that one. That way
Okay.
folks can, know where to go and find you if you
Yes.
like. Um,
Let me reopen that.
so in your work, you mentioned the importance of keeping the porcelain white. And I'm curious, porcelain is one of those clay bodies that can go to a very high temperature. Are you taking this all the way up to 10 then?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's what allows for it to shrink to, and so my curiosity, you've added color, but not to the sculptural piece. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that difference and why that juxtaposition?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm starting to have like the hummingbird series where, and I'm looking at one of these pieces here on the wall right now where I have the native plants and the color and the illustration that's there. But in front of it and coming off is that porcelain work. And I I wanted to create this conversation where people are drawn in and thinking about the vibrancy of plants and nature and this thing that we all have a relationship with, and be drawn in by that, but then also see the sculptural aspect that is white and void of color, and there's a reason for that, right? There's an absence and just the conversation of the decline of species due to how we exist in our habitat. So I really think, and that is really inspired by what I talked about earlier with the coral bleaching was the first thing that really set that off. I was like, this is just such an amazing representation. Coral reefs are just the most colorful, vibrant, amazing spaces, and the fact that when the sea temperature rises that they turn white, it's just like a perfect way to show um, that that void and that sadness, the absence there of life, right? So I have been interested in kind of bringing color into the porcelain work in some ways, and I want to experiment with that. But I really think that right now, the white porcelain just makes sense. And the other thing that it does is that they are very intricate. These like it's very tiny and everything, and it enables you to kind of just be brought in and experience that in this one piece. Without the intensity of like all the color and everything. But yeah, so that's kind of what I've been thinking about with that work.
Great. So you mentioned the importance of moving towards an educational bent within
Mhm.
your work. So I'm curious uh, if you could have a viewer walk away with any kind of key emotion or learning from your work to make it the most successful in your eye. Tell us what that would feel like or be what would be understood in having experienced your work out in the world.
Yeah, I feel like what would be really powerful for me would be if somebody in the audience was able to see the work and be drawn in and interested. So if it was interesting enough for them to spend time with, a lot of people who are accessing this work, we live in the city and we don't have as much time to pause and stop with nature. So I'm trying to call attention to that. Like, if you're going into this show, you're like, oh, I'm really thinking about these species and these birds and all of these things. And I hope it would encourage them to take that time once they go outside, whether it's just like, something between the sidewalk cracks, or they could go to a park in their city or anything like that. And to have an interest in noticing and thinking about and spending time with those creatures, and then also thinking about how they could bring them into their lives. And that's why I was so excited about this conversation with like native plants in Ohio, is because people can think about, oh, I can plant these plants and then it might draw in this hummingbird, and that would be an exciting thing for me. And just like a healthy, positive thing that we can like all do in some way. So trying to think more about like tangible ways that we can think about and do those things. And there's so many pathways that we can do that, and I could go on and on about that. But yeah, I think it would just be, oh, it would be so exciting just if people were able to enjoy and spend time with it, and then to be thinking about it, and then maybe even do something with it in their time afterwards in relationship to their own relationship with the natural world.
And so I think my last question for you is in regard to labor. So this work is super labor intensive. The ceramic bits, the illustrative bits, the amount of time and attention and potential for the risk of failure is really big in these. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of the artist's hand and labor in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for noticing that. Yeah, I feel like I I equate like labor to love in a lot of ways. And by taking the time to really understand these species, even before the labor part happens, just with the research, and then to spend the labor and spend the time thinking about that relationship, and hoping that that draws attention when people experience the work in the future, is just really essential to me. And yeah, it's an ode of that time, is just a shout out also to nature itself in a way, because nature takes so much time. It's like nature is we are moving so fast and our lives are so short. And in the natural world, things are happening in a much longer, slower way. And I love taking the time to think about that time and try to be more present in my life. And use that labor for love, and hope that people would experience that when they're seeing my work. And it's also for me, as people have conversations with me about like making molds of the pieces or making multiples, I just have such a hard time with that, because I'm thinking about what I'm making and putting on the earth as well as an artist. And I really like to, before I even start something, take the time and think like, is this worth it? Is this the right thing to make, especially with firing and putting something more permanently on the planet? So yeah, thank you for noticing that. It's really important to the conversation, and it's something I really like to talk about and think about with people as they see the work. So I appreciate that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again, Carmen, for the generosity of your time and talent, of course. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Carmen Ostermann as a part of our programming for It's an Honor to Be Here. Again, a special thank you to our curators, Maddie and Maria, and a big thank you to all the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor, who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.